Hi, I'm Karen Downing Ripley, and I invite you to join me on a recent, unexpected side trip to Brittany, France during the 80th anniversary of the city of Plélo's liberation celebration and learn why Americans and Bretons celebrate their shared DNA from World War II. A last-minute decision to deliver my father's World War II documents to the city of Plélo, France, opened me up to an amazing experience that has truly changed my life. I ask that you join me so that you too can know and appreciate how we Americans are respected and revered because our ancestors fought to liberate the town of Plélo in August 1944. After a stirring day of remembrance on the first day of the liberation of Plélo, we prepared for Saturday evening's ball to be held out of doors at Colonel Hamsley Stadium. Colonel Hamsley was revered so much as Plélo's liberator that they named their stadium after him. It has a special significance because it had been where the Germans had been bivouacked and where they had been held as prisoners of war after Colonel Hamsley's attack. There were monuments on either side of the stadium entrance, extolling the fact that this was Colonel Hamsley's stadium. Seeing this honor to Colonel Hamsley made me very proud. There were also markers on either side of the road leading to the village. This marked the liberation route where 5 tanks and 20 men, led by Colonel Hamsley, attacked the Germans and liberated the town of Plélo on August 7, 1944. Convoys tracing the liberation route traveled through the town on their way to the stadium for the grand military display. The convoy illustrated restored vintage World War II vehicles that were in excellent running condition. Earlier in the day, we had prepared for the ball by dressing like the rest of the town in 1940s vintage clothes. Melanie had been an absolute doll and found me a 1940s outfit to wear to the evening's event. She also made appointments for us both to get our hair done. It was great fun to get unique 40s hairstyles. Our beautician wound our hair back into a chignon and placed small pink roses in the back. It looked gorgeous, and it matched our outfits. After seeing the clever outfit Bert wore with his golf cap from St. Andrews in Scotland, we were ready to party like 1944. When we returned to the stadium that evening, we found it completely transformed into an American Army camp, set up around 20 World War II American Army tents, each exhibiting various aspects of Army gear used in World War II. Each tent demonstrated a certain activity during the war. Displays included the communications tent, which held 1940s radios and unique equipment. Each tent had an interpreter, dressed in 1940s American and Allied military uniforms, to demonstrate how the equipment was used and how important it was to the war effort. As we walked around the campground, we visited a tent that showed how women in the Army lived in their tents during their free time. On their time off, they were doing what most girls do. They were getting pretty and styling each other's hair in the 40s look and painting their fingernails. They were also displaying a large assortment of 40s cosmetics. Everything was shipshape, with their cots made up and everything neat and tidy. I talked to the girls a little bit. I admired their 1940s makeup displayed on the table. It reminded me of my mother and her red lipstick in its gold tube that fascinated me so as a child. I would look up at my mom and dream that someday I would wear red lipstick and look beautiful just like she did. Even though I didn't speak French and the girls didn't speak English, we talked to each other with our actions and smiles. Neither side really understood the other. Regardless, we connected and enjoyed each other because girls just like to have fun. Melanie translated a conversation with Erwin Jezequel, the vice president of the 15th Cavalry Historical Group in Brittany. He proudly showed me his perfect U.S. Army uniform, replete with decorations and medals. I was so happy to meet him. He and his family and his charming wife all proudly wore U.S. World War II military uniforms.
My name is Erwan Jezequel. I live in Pléneuf in the Côte d'Armor region near Saint-Brieuc in Brittany. I'm married and I have 2 children. I'm also the vice president of a historical reenactment association. I've been involved in reenactment for about 15 years now. I've been part of this association for at least 4 or 5 years, and I've served as vice president for about 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. When I was very young, without really realizing it, I was already passionate. I used to draw bridges. And over time, since my family has a strong military background, my grandparents would often give me model kits. American planes, British planes, German planes. I became deeply interested in World War II. Because my family lived in Brittany at the time, they often took me to World War II museums. And the more I learned, the more passionate I became. So when we arrived that Sunday morning, with all the vehicles, everything began to fall into place. And how can I put it? Seeing all those flags gathered together, that really stays with you. When you think about everything that happened, all those American soldiers who came to France for the liberation, to see that history come to life. And since I'm from this area, it affected me even more, to see what the Americans did here. Which unit liberated this sector? I already knew, from conversations with Eric, that it was the 15th Cavalry that liberated the area and that liberated Plélo. So as a former soldier and as vice president of an association that represents the American unit that liberated this region, being there that Sunday morning for the ceremony, seeing all the flag bearers, the officials who were present, and there was Colonel Birmingham, if I'm remembering correctly. And during the ceremony, when my wife was called to come up on stage and receive her decoration from the colonel, honestly, it was incredibly touching.
He invited us to attend the next day's ceremony when Colonel Mike Birmingham, as the president of the U.S. 15th Cavalry Historical Group, would award medals for outstanding contributions to the remembrance of Colonel Hamsley and his men who liberated Plélo. As we walked around the campground, I found one tent particularly interesting, as it exhibited diverse military uniforms of the time. The display of uniforms was manned by 2 young girls. While this was just a small historical detail, it reminded me of how important it is to share our oral traditions.
My name is Pierre Lesouder. I was born in 1942 on the 30th of December, 1942. So I was in fact only 2 years old at the time of the liberation of the town of Plélo. But I can tell you another story, one that comes from my cousins. My uncle had sent his young son to Lance Cochard. He told him, "Go pick up the packages that arrived by launch." So the boy went off with his little cart, his tambourot, and his horse. He passed through the town of Pluha, and as usual, he stopped at a cafe to get his tobacco. He always went there. Then he went to fetch the packages at Lance Cochard. It was nothing but weapons and ammunition. He loaded everything into his cart, covered it with 2 blankets to hide the whole lot, and headed back. About an hour and a half later, he came back through, stopped again at the same cafe, and sat at his usual table. There were German soldiers in the cafe. They had hung their belts on a coat rack. He had his drink like nothing was out of the ordinary, and when he left, he took the belts from the rack, even though he wasn't even with his cart at the time. It's a family story, you know, and I'm sure it's true, because it was my cousin who told it to me. It took me an entire afternoon to get her to open up and agree to tell it.
I worry that American students, unlike the French, may not even study World War II history anymore. Bert and I had visited a nearby resistance museum and had watched an actual film taken of the resistance in hiding during World War II. This showed the resistance women as they were secretly meeting the men to exchange vital underground information. The rest of the time they lived in town and wore civilian clothes to conceal their nefarious actions against the Germans. The women rode bicycles to bring the men food and information, They acted as conduits between the villages and the men who had to stay underground at all times. Fortunately, Colonel Hamsley and his men came in contact with the resistance fighters, who entreated them to stop the Germans from annihilating Playlo. Had it not been for their intervention, Colonel Hamsley would not have known to charge into Playlo to save its people and win their liberation from German occupation. The selfless contributions of the men and women of the resistance resulted in success for liberation. Another tent was manned by what looked to be a paratrooper in his uniform. He talked to us about how important the maps were and how they needed to have accurate, detailed maps at all times to assist in reconnaissance. Our military had to know where they and the Germans were at all times. Paratroopers and cavalry needed local knowledge to find their way through the villages and around the hedgerows. Eventually, they also needed to know where the Allies were advancing in hopes that they would soon be coming in their direction. There was also an entire exhibit displaying Army cooking. They showed a big truck filled with all the types of food that would be eaten by the Americans and Allied armies. They had big baskets of potatoes and vegetables, and they also displayed various meats that they were chopping up and preparing. It was really fascinating because the food and all the utensils were truly of that era, and the food looked really good. The camp also displayed a complete medical facility, with an ambulance displaying a big red cross. They exhibited all types of medical equipment needed to help the injured in wartime. They even had a girl with a big gash in her arm that they were tending to, but of course it was all done with makeup. The American camp set up in Colonel Hamsley Stadium was fascinating and inspiring. It was wonderful to see how the people of Brittany remembered and honored those who fought for the liberation in World War II. Join me and Bert and Melanie as we continue to enjoy the festival celebrating the 80th anniversary of D-Day and the liberation with the wonderful people of Playlo. We were soon to learn that the fun was to be followed by emotional feelings of gratitude that had nowhere to go but straight to our hearts.